everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rotten Tomatoes is Wrong. I am surrounded today by two of the M's, Mr. Mark Ellis and Mr. Scott Mantz.
Yeah,
man.
Mark Ellis.
Well, Scott, it's great to have you back here today. He is a host, QA moderator, and a film critic, and somebody who I know was definitely talking about these two films when they were in theaters, and I'm sure on the radio and on TV. We're talking, of course, about Martin Scorsese's two most iconic films because it is 80th birthday on November 17th. Literally 60 years of making movies, still at the top of his game. This week, we're going to be breaking down Goodfellas and Casino. That is like really kind of crazy. Are you a big gambler?
I am not a big gambler, except when I go to the movies.
Really? What about you, Mark? You are not anything like that.
I do enjoy some blackjack.
Really?
Yeah, I love sitting down at the table. I love talking some white trash and having some fun with the dealer. But I also was introduced to the modern concept of video blackjack, which is great because whenever I'm ready to go back into my normal introverted self, which people don't believe, it happens. I just love playing video blackjack because you just play by yourself. And it's cheaper.
Yeah. I will go ahead and let's get a little bit more dived into it. Again, it's Martin Scorsese's 80th birthday.
He's a Scorpio, just like this guy.
Yeah, every time he talks about Rotten Tomatoes is when I realize he's a Scorpio. I'll say that. Fan shout out to Ben Norris. I just watched Casino again recently. It's such an underappreciated classic with every performance being top notch. I think it's unfairly judged against Goodfellas, which is excellent by its own merits. Must ask Goodfellas versus Casinos. Again, you guys are the best. Thanks for the work that you do. First of all, Ben, I love you for comparing these two because you wanted to ask the question. I will say this. I don't think it's even a good comparison because these two films are so similar, and I think the only fault they had is that they're too similar.
I feel like not only are they too similar, but they came out too close apart. Yeah. Let's just say
5 years.
5 years. 5 years. There wasn't enough time to miss Goodfellas, and then boom, you got Casino. Like, let's say Casino came out 15 years later. Then you know, in that case, it'd be like, oh man, we haven't had a good, like, you know, Goodfellas type of movie from Scorsese in a really long time. You would have been hungry for Casino. But in the case of coming out 5 years later, like, didn't we just see this?
What's interesting with Casino is it happens a lot with directors of Martin Scorsese's ilk, which I feel like they want to get a do-over. Like, as much as Martin Scorsese loves Goodfellas, if you hear him talking about it, like, it was a very hard production and it was like very challenging. And he didn't, I think, get the story as well as he would have wanted. Because if you really look at the film, it is like a tight, and I'm talking murderous, hour and 15 minutes. And then the last hour or so gets a little bit more meandered if you judge them by the two halves.
Well, what's great about Goodfellas compared to Casino is that, first of all, Goodfellas is a good 45 minutes shorter than Casino. And that's, you talk about it being a tight film, that's its strength.
Yeah.
You feel it. Yeah. But here's the thing, like, what's great about Goodfellas is that it's the rise, it's the good times, and then it's the downfall. When like everyone gets their comeuppance, it's the consequence of living this life. To that extent, the way that Goodfellas is structured was very much the way that Paul Thomas Anderson structured Boogie Nights.
Exactly.
It's like very, very, very similar. Now, what Casino doesn't have is that same defined rise and fall, which is what makes Goodfellas a better movie.
One thing I will say also about Boogie Nights, the fall in Boogie Nights is so much better. That was the part about Goodfellas, the former altar boy that Martin Scorsese was.
Yeah.
He was always dabbling with the evil. He could never get with the evil that wasn't biblical, which was violence. Remember, all of the violence is what Scorsese's known for. That's biblical.
It's embracing the full.
It's embracing
the full downfall.
Yeah, it's embracing the full downfall. You can even see it in the Taxi Driver. Shameless plug. I recently did a conversation with Quentin Tarantino for his new book, Cinema Speculation.
Hey!
And one of the chapters, or one of the books that he really dives into is Taxi Driver, and this hypothetical that Taxi Driver was originally supposed to be directed by Brian De Palma. He had the script, and it went to Scorsese. And if you look at it, Martin Scorsese never betrays Travis Bickle. He always treats him very kindly. And that's the same way he treats his characters in this one. And I think in Goodfellas, he gets the bravado so well. But when you show his downfall, it almost feels like, Henry, what are you doing? When it should really be like, yeah, we know where you're going, Henry.
Well, the thing about these two movies, though, is that I feel like the critics got more fatigue from Goodfellas to Casino than the audience did, because the audience, either one of these movies are just such great breezy watches, which is weird when you talk about how in-depth and like detailed the subject matter is. But if it's on TV, it just immediately sucks you in. And Goodfellas and Casino feel like one long giant piece. And so Goodfellas, 96%. Certified fresh on the Tomatometer. Casino dips down. It's still certified fresh, but it's only 79%.
Yeah.
But the audience score for both of them are in the 90 percentiles.
Interesting.
With Goodfellas being 97% and Casino being 93%. And so, you know, when I think I did a versus on Rotten Tomatoes right here of Scorsese versus Spielberg. But it's like Scorsese is more known for like this sort of thing, where Spielberg, he gets the rap of being the blockbuster guy, but he's also done a lot of smaller movies or different genres. Scorsese has done that. Like, go watch a movie like Hugo, but then this is what he's most known for. And so I think the comparison is apt, where it's like Casino or Goodfellas. And to Ben's point, there are fans out there that are like, no, I would rather watch Casino than Goodfellas.
I think Scorsese's or Spielberg's most Scorsese type movie is Munich.
Yeah.
Munich feels like the most like a Scorsese film. But you're right. Spielberg is more known for the blockbuster stuff, where some of Spielberg's best movies are actually closer to Scorsese sensibilities, like obviously like Munich, but also, you know, Saving Private Ryan. I mean, there's a lot of
Bridge of Spies, stuff like that. Yeah.
Before we get too far, though, I definitely want to make sure that we at least set the stage a little bit and sort of like get where we are. But first and foremost, I need to get our definitive answer. Which or which? Mantz?
Oh, absolutely. Hands down. Goodfellas. Are you kidding?
Goodfellas?
Without question, Rotten Tomatoes is right about this.
For sure.
I think on both fronts. I think the number itself is pretty accurate for both Goodfellas and Casino.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
think,
because I don't think that Casino is a bad film. I just think that it came out too close to Goodfellas. It's only 5 years. It is too similar.
It ain't Goodfellas.
And it ain't Goodfellas. Now, what if Casino, Jacqueline Coley, what if Casino came out first? What if Casino came out in 1990 and then Goodfellas came out 5 years later? How will the scores really change on Rotten Tomatoes is wrong?
I mean, I don't know, but I have a hard time with it because I'm in a different place. Because I actually, like, before we get to that question, like my question on it, I actually think Rotten Tomatoes is right on this. I do think Goodfellas is better, but I actually think Casino is worse because Martin Scorsese grew as a filmmaker in that time period, but he regressed as far as what he chose to do with this film.
I completely agree.
Yeah, so he actually became a better filmmaker in that time, and so the look of Casino.
So that's 79% you think is too high?
Yeah,
for
a little
Casino.
bit. I actually do. For what he actually does on screen, because this is the difference between the audience score and the critic score of this one, and then I want to take us to 2 Minutes with Tim real quick, is the audience is passion. And the passion that Martin Scorsese has for these characters and these people is evident through everything that he does. His skill has risen throughout all of the endeavors that he's done since then. I mean, he did Cape Fear after this, and Cape Fear to me is just killing the game, Martin Scorsese, in my opinion, as far as what he could be in his best sentiments. And by the time he gets to Casino, he's retreating back into himself to try and make his John Ford epic about subject matter that was not built for John Ford epics.
Cape Fear came out the year after Goodfellas, and it was up to that point, it was his most commercially successful film.
Yeah.
Counselor.
But yeah. But the last scene on the boat in the rain is so crazy. Good. It's so good. But yeah, you're right. I think that he was evolving as a filmmaker, and you know, when Casino came out in 95, it was like Scorsese putting on a comfy pair of slippers, right?
Especially after The Age of Innocence, which was a period piece.
Yeah. And a period piece that people didn't understand. But let's hold on before we start going too far. Let's listen to what Tim had to say. Take us back to 95 and 90 because there's a lot of context that he could give us. And let's take it away, Brian, with the music. Cue 2 Minutes with Tim.
2 Minutes with Tim. Before we get into this, I want to say that I think Goodfellas is a better movie, but I've probably seen Casino in bits and pieces dozens more times. Back when I had cable and I would be channel surfing, it seemed like Casino was always on, albeit with some of the more colorful language edited out. I'd stumble upon it when I was clicking through channels and I'd say to myself, I guess I know what I'm doing for the next couple hours. But anyway, here's the breakdown. Goodfellas from 1990 is certified fresh at 96% on the Tomatometer with 105 reviews, and it has a 97% audience score. Casino from 1995 is certified fresh at 79% with 70 reviews, and it has a 93% audience score. So what did the critics have to say? In a fresh review of Goodfellas, Sheila Benson of the Los Angeles Times wrote, Goodfellas, which somehow mixes its horrors with a deep vein of mordant humor, flows with the exuberance of a filmmaker who has every detail nailed and a few lovely moves he wants to show us. In a fresh review of Casino, Janet Maslin of the New York Times wrote, of all the bravura of visual effects in Martin Scorsese's dazzlingly stylish Casino, it's a glimpse of ordinary people that delivers the greatest jolt. The Rotten Tomatoes critics' consensus for Goodfellas reads, hard-hitting and stylish, Goodfellas is a gangster classic and arguably the high point of Martin Scorsese's career. The Rotten Tomatoes critics' consensus for Casino reads, impressive ambition and bravura performances from an outstanding cast help Casino pay off in spite of a familiar narrative that may strike some viewers as a safe bet for director Martin Scorsese. So that's Goodfellas and Casino. Let's kick it back to Jacqueline and Mark, who are the kind of folks who root for the bad guys in the movies.
That's actually fair.
Is that true?
Depends on the movie.
Yeah, sure.
If they have an ethos, I usually understand.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be
a gangster.
A podcast host.
Even better. Look, I don't want to get too far into I do like what Tim says about Casino because he is right about that I feel like Casino was way more prevalent. Like Casino was a TNT movie that you saw all the time. And Goodfellas, for some reason, it was infamous with its violence. I don't think they could cut around it as well.
Well, first of all, with Goodfellas, I've seen the movie so many times, like so many times. And it's the kind of movie I could watch anytime, any day, no matter what mood I'm in. If you wanted to stop and pause right now and watch it right now, I'd be totally down for that. And it's not a movie I need to rewatch because I have seen it so many times. But to prep for this podcast, I had to go back and watch Casino because I haven't seen it in a really long time. So I watched it in one sitting, 3 hours and 15 minutes. And I'm just like, yeah, it really is like Goodfellas in Vegas. The characters are not as interesting. The story is not as fully defined. It doesn't have that like more defined arc like Goodfellas has. But it's still a really, really good movie. It's just that, how do you follow Goodfellas with the same movie and not get compared to Goodfellas?
Yeah, which I think that's what critics were talking about at the time. And that's definitely what we're going to be talking about a little bit at the time before we get a bit of a Martin Scorsese history lesson. So let's go ahead and move on into movie talk. I really feel weird even doing this because I think Martin Scorsese's daughter, who gives him Marvel-wrapped Christmas presents every year, probably maybe listens to Rotten Tomatoes is wrong, but there is not a fiber of my being that will allow myself the thought that he will ever hear this. But I will say it's an interesting thing because I feel Martin Scorsese has done so much for films and filmmaking and the preservation. And he's such a great film historian. He's such a great champion of this thing that we've all in some way, shape, or form dedicated our life to. But being a fan of his work, when you look at it now in the grander sense, and when you look at it now when he talks about where movies are, for me is much more complicated. It is much more complicated to see Martin Scorsese as this established filmmaker nearing the end of their career, lament over what privileges they're no longer available to them. When I realized that was privileges that were never available for Black, female, or brown filmmakers. So it's like a hard thing for me. So it's a weird thing for me to be a fan of Martin Scorsese now. I think it's easier for y'all, but like, what is it like for you being a fan of him this long?
Well, just in terms of Martin Scorsese and like, there's always a comment on Twitter like he thinks the Marvel movies are theme park rides or anything like that. I afford people who are his age a few get off my lawn moments. I'm 42 and I have those. So who would I be if I was like, oh, come on, Martin. The guy's 80. Let him think that they're theme park rides.
I give him, but it does make being a fan of his more complicated as I get older. But it makes a fan of being Quentin Tarantino more complicated as I get older. And that doesn't mean that either one of them are not filmmakers where if they make another movie, I'm not queuing it up.
Well, the other thing that I think we've had to rectify with our modern society and how we know everybody's dirty laundry now is that you have to separate art from artists sometimes. And
absolutely you do.
So it's less about me holding a poster of Martin Scorsese in my bedroom, but I can still put a poster of either Goodfellas or The King of Comedy or Hugo in my bedroom. And it's so hard for me to say, as Tim did, that Goodfellas is the height of Martin Scorsese's career because I feel like he's not a single peak kind of filmmaker. I feel like he's the Himalayas. Yeah. I feel like there's a bunch of incredible peaks.
For sure
Goodfellas
is.
might be his Everest, but there's a lot of really tall mountains.
I think, first of all, when it comes to Scorsese, making a comment about like superhero movies, I mean, look, he's not wrong. I don't blame him for feeling that way. As much as I love the Marvel and DC movies myself, sometimes I get a little sick of that stuff too. I'm not going to lie.
And again, I'm not even faulting him in it. What I'm saying is it makes being a fan of his now more complicated.
See, I hear your point, but I just feel like Scorsese has continually tried to challenge himself, and he has continually tried to be very ambitious. Whether or not you think The Irishman is too long, sure, 3.5 hours. Yeah, it is. But, here you have a filmmaker who's doing stuff like The Departed and Silence and The Irishman, while also doing documentaries on Bob Dylan and George Harrison.
And the Stones, man.
And the Stones and the band. So I think this guy is always doing something, and whether he's 80 years old this year, I think it's pretty cool that he is still pushing himself and challenging himself.
I don't disagree. I'm not even talking about the Marvel thing, because like they are theme park rides. It's why Disney owns them. They're theme park company.
True.
I'm like, come on now. I'm not in any illusion on that. I'm more talking about what he's saying now about how commercialistic movies have gotten, and how like, it's much more about the bottom line and da-da-da. Movies should make a profit, but this is art, da-da-da. And look, I've studied blaxploitation. The reason why blaxploitation exists is because nobody gave any of the money. And when New Hollywood people like that were coming up through Corman, like Coppola and Spielberg and all those folks were coming through, one of the reasons why they were able to get pushed through to the studio system was because they did not have to be forced out of it, and they could go through the launching pad.
But Jacqueline, I think that Scorsese's point has more to do with just the way the times have changed.
For him.
No, hang on. Just a minute. Hear me out here. Because even before COVID, what was happening? There was turning out to be a bigger gap between the types of movies that people were going to see in theaters and the types of movies that people were going to stay home and watch on streaming services. And all that the pandemic did was it sped that process up, where you have a much, much bigger gap between the types of movies that people are going to see in theaters, which is the comic book stuff.
The theme park rides.
The theme park rides.
Because you got to leave your house to go to a theme park.
Right. And, when I saw Top Gun Maverick, which I love, is my favorite movie of 2022, I love Top Gun Maverick. I saw it in theaters 5 times. I love the hell out of that movie. And that movie brought a lot of people back to theaters who hadn't been to the movie since before March of 2020. But there's still a gap. There's still a gap, which is why so many movies now are, like mid-budget, low budget. They're just going straight to Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, Paramount Plus, Peacock. And I get it. And I think that for Scorsese, I think that part of his, I can't speak for him.
Me
okay.
either.
But I think that there is, like, when I hear him say stuff like that, I think that that's part of it. I think that it's just that people are more
But that's not
pickier.
what he says. He says specifically he finds it disturbing and sometimes disgusting that now, and the quote exactly was, everything is bent on a commercialistic bent. Like the first thought is this going to make any money?
And he's not wrong.
And he's not wrong.
Right.
And what I would say to him is, this is just a very clear statement. There is not a single black filmmaker that has not been the situation from the get. There's not a single female filmmaker where that has not been the consideration from the get.
So you're saying that Scorsese's feeling now what black filmmakers were feeling in the 70s.
This is exactly what black people was feeling.
I get that.
And
for sure.
That's what's frustrating to me, is because I studied that. And this is the thing I think. When these situations happen, what does end up happening usually is other things pop off. And I'm more interested from the type of movies that are going to be born out of these new financial imperatives, because I think they're going to be avant-garde. I think they're going to be interesting. I think they're going to live in different places. And I think they're going to really show us, because that's what blaxploitation did. The entire 90s sort of action movement was built off of blaxploitation, which was born out of exclusion.
But I think that's the great thing about artists.
Yes,
and
exactly.
whether you're talking about a filmmaker like Scorsese, or you're talking about anybody else in really any other line of artistic endeavor, when you are handcuffed, it sucks.
It does.
But you tend to use your artistic ability and your sensibilities to figure out a way to get out of that.
Like Shyamalan did when he went back to Glass.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The most obvious example is, hey, Steve, the shark isn't working today.
Yeah.
We got to figure something else out. And so you have these hurdles that you have to overcome, much more so that are societal as far as what Jacqueline's talking about. But with a guy like Martin Scorsese, who's 80, or somebody who wants to be a young Scorsese, you're figuring your way out to make a movie and to get it seen, to get eyeballs on it that is outside of just that theme park system, as he would say. But I would point anybody who's an aspiring filmmaker to look at Goodfellas and Casino, not just in terms of, hey, it's a really good movie, right? But I would challenge, especially with Casino, because I think we can all agree there's some fat to be trimmed there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, I'm not smart enough to know where it is, but when I'm watching Casino, the big difference between Goodfellas and Casinos to me is that I feel like when I'm watching Casinos, especially in one sitting like you did, Scott, is I'll get to be about 2 hours in and I'm like, wait, have we already seen this?
Yeah.
Has this already happened?
Redundant. It is redundant.
I love it, everything. But when I find myself missing in Casino that I get in Goodfellas is a Ray Liotta.
Yeah.
Is somebody who's just driving that action.
Yeah. Well, in Casino, De Niro's character, Sam Rothstein, is the one driving the action. But Sam Rothstein is not as interesting as Henry Hill. He's just not.
Right.
Also, let's look at Goodfellas for what it is. Henry Hill, the actual man, was a drug addict, a womanizer, like literally the most despicable degenerate you would ever meet. And the biggest conceit of Goodfellas is making him seem like a good guy for the first hour. You know what I mean? He's a good fella. Like, that's the joke.
It helps to show him as a kid.
Yeah, it really does help to show him
because we can all root for a kid.
Well, because you're also seeing, because you do show him as a kid, you're seeing the loss of innocence.
Yes.
And you don't have that in Casino.
Mm-hmm.
No. So one thing I will say with Goodfellas that I found the difference, and I think you touched on it. One, I still feel Martin Scorsese's like independent, came up outside of, the studio system, Coppola sort of mentality in making Goodfellas. Because if you really look at his filmography, he went to more established things in the middle until he got to the King of Comedy. And King of Comedy was such like a left field turn for him in so many ways that I really feel like with Goodfellas, this was him trying to return back to what he had with Mean Streets.
Well, okay, I'm glad you brought up the 80s.
Yeah.
Because starting with Raging Bull, which technically is a 70s movie, even though it came out in 1980. 1980 is still considered the 70s.
It is.
Just for the record on that, even though when it comes to best movies of the 80s, it's always Raging Bull, right? So here's the thing about the 80s and about The King of Comedy, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. I know you love it too, Mr. Pupkin. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.
Agreed.
But listen, so the 80s are the most misunderstood decade of Martin Scorsese's career, because after the 70s, which I think is his most crucial period of time, when you had Mean Streets, when you had obviously Taxi Driver, but also the underrated New York in 77 and The Last Waltz in 78, one of the best concert movies ever made, period. I think that's his most fruitful period. But then after Raging Bull, he does The King of Comedy, which at the time was misunderstood, mixed reviews. And then After Hours, which hardly anyone saw, very, very mixed reviews. And then The Color of Money, which at the time got negative reviews. Now, on Rotten Tomatoes, all three of those movies, the Rotten Tomatoes scores are very, 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 very certified fresh with like the high 80s or the low 90s. And I think the reason for that is a lot of those newer reviews are done by people looking back versus at the time. So the reason I bring that up is because in the documentary Life Itself about Roger Ebert, so Scorsese is interviewed for that. And there's a great moment in that film when Scorsese says, I remember when Roger Ebert reviewed The Color of Money and he gave it a bad review. And he said, you're better than this. He said, I'm paraphrasing. He didn't actually say that, but he says, really? Come on, Marty. You are better than this. I'll give you a pass for now, but that's it. The next one better be better. And you see Scorsese talking about it like that. Martin Scorsese was hurt by that.
It's like a coach telling you got to give more of an effort in the game.
But looking back on those films, Color of Money, is a great film. It's the only movie in which Paul Newman won a competitive acting Oscar for lead actor for you know, Fast Eddie Felson. After Hours is a wild film. I love that movie. Really, really underground.
New York is the only one on that one I feel is horribly misunderstood, but not for the ways you think. And Color of Money is just a good movie that had the mistake of casting Tom Cruise.
But I'm telling you, the king of comedy was ahead of its time.
It got great reviews when it came out and was called The Joker.
Well, I love.
It didn't get that great a review.
It didn't get that great.
It did. I'm like, you're bringing me back to some PTSD.
And
about
it was
that
just
movie.
called Joker, not The Joker.
The Joker, which Martin Scorsese actually produced on. So that was like the other thing is like he got his movie to Best Picture, however many years later.
A few decades later.
A few decades later.
But I understand why people would call Goodfellas the pinnacle of his career, because at least up until like that, it felt like everything that he had done up until 1990 had sort of culminated with Goodfellas, but it was also sort of a look back and like sort of a more updated Mean Streets. At least it had that sort of feel. But you also just had these characters, this triumvirate, and God love Paul Sorvino, rest in peace. I always felt like sometimes he's on the poster, but I always felt like he's the guy in the background, and then you have De Niro and Liotta and Pesci.
But when you see the images, when you see the from that photo session, when you see Paul Sorvino with them,
it's pretty cool.
Paul Sorvino's Paulie. He's the guy behind the guy behind the guy.
Right.
Okay. When he shows up, you know, what is it that Henry Hill says? You know, Paulie didn't say much. He didn't move fast. He didn't have to.
Yeah.
No one really had access to Paulie. I love Paul Sorvino's character in that film. In fact, I love all of the characters in that film. I think the characters, whether the main characters, the supporting characters, or even the characters you just kind of like see for a second, are much, much more memorable and iconic and more defined than in Casino. Remember that scene in the bar near the beginning of Goodfellas after Henry Hill turns into Ray Liotta? Is he goes into the bar, and this is, Nicky Eyes, and this is Jimmy Two Times, because he said everything twice. I'm going to go get the papers, get the papers.
Yeah. I want to know what happens to Jimmy Two Times. Also,
Jimmy Two Times.
I know someone who has written a spec script prequel on Stacks.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I know somebody who's written basically, how did Stacks end up getting shot? Like that whole story. How did he end up with these white boys? And
how did he end up falling asleep at the wheel?
Yeah, and it was like a really tragic tale because it talks about his girlfriend and like really what happened. And like the rumor was that he got high and but that wasn't really what happened.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So it's like this whole idea of like Stacks getting set up. And I know somebody that wrote that. But that's the whole point. Every one of those Martin Scorsese characters, you could write a whole backstory on.
And it's tough for me, if I had to give you my favorite scene in Goodfellas, it is impossible to do, and it's really dependent on my mood. Like, there's some movies where I'm like, that's the best scene in the movie.
Yeah.
With this one, you could obviously point to that extended shot when he's walking to the back of the restaurant.
Love it. In fact, that shot, by the way, was so iconic that when it came to Swingers in 1996, directed by Doug Liman, like he basically recreated that shot when they're walking through the, I think it's the swing club. Was it the Dresden or anyway,
I
one of
remember
those
them
clubs.
talking about that shot in the movie.
Yeah.
And they're just a bunch of actors. So, it took them 3 days to light that. It's just sort of
and
like,
then you see them do it themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the one that I love currently is I love Pesci's hot-headedness. And so you can point to the clown scene, but I love the Shinebox scene. That scene kills me because it's such a great example. And if you don't know it, they're all hanging out at the bar, and then another group comes in and they're with a different crew, and the crews have a respect for each other, so you don't touch one another. But Pesci used to work and used to shine the shoes of this guy, and so this guy is reminding Joe Pesci of where he came from, and Pesci's got a date with them, and he
feels like he's being embarrassed.
He just has to keep saying it, and it's the problem with being in the mob is it's just never enough. You got to go back to the cookie jar one more time. You got to do one more job. You got to do one more kill, and this poor bastard, Billy Bat, says, go get your Shinebox. And he just can't resist it. If he had just not said that and just gone back to his party, everything would have been cool.
Yeah, he would not have been whacked. He would not have been knocked off, which eventually led to Tommy being whacked as a made man. Now, I'm glad you brought that scene up, the Shinebox scene, because that scene is very reminisce in Casino of the pen.
Yes.
The pen scene in Casino equals the shine box scene in Goodfellas.
See, I always thought the Micro Imperioli scene and that was the pen. Because it basically this idea of both of these movies that at any point, violence can be the response to anything, literally anything.
And that's why the clown scene is so good, because you don't know if Joe Pesci is actually upset with Leota.
Yes, and that is actually what sets the framework for that.
Yeah.
Like of everything later of like, this dude will kill people for the most like slight.
He's killed people for less.
Yes.
And guess what? So will Jimmy the Gent. I'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
The most iconic scene of Goodfellas, of perhaps Martin Scorsese's movies, period, is why am I funny? What makes me funny?
Yeah.
What am I, clown? Do I make you funny?
Clown,
Because here's the thing, no matter how many times you watch Goodfellas, when you get to that moment, you're like, uh-oh, here we go.
Yeah.
It makes you feel just as uncomfortable the 30th time as it did the first time.
Yeah.
And, you know, you're really like Henry is like, he's scared. Like he's scared, and then he just like blinked his eyes and goes, "Get the hell out of here, Tommy!" You know. But that scene, it's just one of the most quoted, one of the most referenced, one of the most famous scenes of Scorsese's, and if not movies of the 80s and the 90s. And I just don't think that Casino has a moment like that. I think that the pen scene is a great scene. I think that the scene when Ginger, played by Golden Globe winner Sharon Stone, when she goes back to De Niro's home to get her stuff and the cops are there, that's a great scene just because the two of them are such great actors, and she was also nominated for that. But I just don't think that Casino, there's no one scene of Casino that is as good as a bunch of individual scenes in Goodfellas.
Well, I think the thing with Goodfellas and that scene in particular that you're talking about with the clown is it's one of these few scenes in the movies that tells the movie in the scene. Everything that is important about Goodfellas
you know all the characters
in that scene. You know the characters, you know the stakes, you know how dangerous this can be, and even Tommy with his joke, you may falter under questioning. It also gives you the preview of what's going to happen later. So it's like the scene in Edgar Wright's in Shaun of the Dead where they say what they're going to do. You know, we're going to go drop out of Mary's. Like it's that. It's like the scene in the middle of Tar when she's sitting with her mentor and she's basically talking about what's going to happen to her by the end of the movie. Really, really masterful movies can bring what they are down to one essential scene, put it in the middle of the movie that can then tell that story tangentially. And you're right. There is a scene like that in Casino, but the stupid thing is it's only the 30 seconds at the beginning of the movie right before he blows up.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That's it.
Also, at the end.
And at the end. So basically it just bookends it. And it's not really one big scene. It's just in 30 seconds of him sitting in that car, kind of talking through how he got here and the loneliness of him being here, thinking back to Sharon, and then he blows up. That's Casino.
You know, when I was rewatching Casino and I was watching the end of Casino, and Sam Rothstein, Ace, is thinking of how all the real casinos were demolished to make way for Disneyland in Las Vegas. And I'm thinking, this is Martin Scorsese, who shot Taxi Driver in Times Square in the 70s when it was dirty and grimy and dangerous. And now Times Square, New York, is like Disneyland. But you know, all this talk about Tommy and Joe Pesci is basically playing I would say a more muted version of the same character in Casino. But Jimmy the Gent, De Niro in Goodfellas, they call him Jimmy the Gent for a reason, because, you know, he's smiling. He thinks that he makes you think that you're on his side. And like that moment after the shine box, when everyone exits the bar and the door is closed, and then, you know, you see, Jimmy the Gent, you see, De Niro stepping on the guy's face. And then there's the whole moment after the Lufthansa heist when Jimmy gets paranoid and he starts knocking off the other wise guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, too, is remember in the moment when they kill Billy Batts, Ray Liotta, Henry Hill, is at first horrified. He didn't think it was going to happen. It was just the same way when they didn't think they were going to kill the mattress rug guy, the guy with the toupee. What was his name? I forget his name.
Bats.
No, the other guy. The guy that was like given. No, not Bats. The other guy. The guy that Robert De Niro, who had the Morty, the guy with the rug.
Oh, Morty. Yeah.
Morty.
Jump in a pool and
No, Morty. That guy. When
I want my money.
I want my money. when they kill him that night, again
in the car.
Henry is so naive. He literally just believes that these people are going to make it out of the violence because he made it out of all the violence.
But he's also willing to subscribe to the violence if need be.
Yeah.
And another one of my favorite scenes is the pistol whip scene because he hears that, Lorraine Bracco calls him frantic and he comes home.
I was going to say that's my favorite scene, but if I can tell it.
Well, have at it.
Thank you. I was going to say, because Ashanti's foolish is my favorite scene. I was actually going to set it up this way. I like how Goodfellas permeated the culture in a way that Casino did not. And it wasn't because that wasn't the time that movies could permeate the culture. Age of Innocence permeated the culture more than Casino did in a lot of ways, especially with women of my age. But the scene when Lorraine Bracco is confronting Henry Hill, I think, is the biggest comedy of the world.
When she's sitting on him with the gun?
She's sitting on him because he's dating Janet Ross, the whore that she's buzzing on her door. Her pointing that gun to him is the most hilarious things. It's like giving drug dealers the death penalty, as if this guy is not literally existing with a gun to his head every day. He does not care about you. And so, of course, he leaves. It's a horrible bit of domestic violence, but I just love the comedy of her thinking that her love and what was between her legs, which she's literally holding him down with, and a gun could keep this man from getting in the streets. It's the dumbest thing ever. I loved it.
I feel like the scene at Casino that I find myself gearing up for and that I'm waiting, not to the level of the clown scene, but it's when Ace and his cronies at the casino catch those two who are trying to game the system.
Oh, right.
And they catch them and they take him back and they smash a dude's hand because it also gives me some Don Rickles screen time. And I love that Don Rickles
is his manager, is his assistant manager.
Mr. Las Vegas is the assistant manager at the casino. That's wonderful to me. But I also find myself oddly looking forward to every scene with James Woods because he's just so skeezy in it and she just can't quit him. And I just want Ginger to graduate.
Well, this is the thing with her. Her dice scene is an incredible character introduction.
Yep.
That is a great character introduction. Just her throwing it up.
Throwing all the chips.
Yeah, like that whole scene. And that's a great character introduction scene because she doesn't say hardly anything in that scene and you know exactly who she is and what she's about. And also why Robert De Niro is instantly besotted with her.
I love, both of those movies use music in the same way. They use a soundtrack to propel the story forward as a score. The songs move into one another. Some songs are used for like just a few seconds, some for much, much longer. So there's also that style of Casino that's very similar to Goodfellas. But I think that Goodfellas does a much, much better job of the music. I mean, every time you say those words, as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. How could I go from rags to riches? But also, to this day, no matter where I am, driving, if I'm just out somewhere and I hear the music over a loudspeaker or whatever, whenever I hear Derek and the Dominoes Leyland, in my mind's eye, I am thinking of all the wise guys turning up dead after the Lufthansa heist because Jimmy had them whacked because he was getting too paranoid. I also love the ending credits hearing Sid Vicious sing Frank Sinatra's My Way.
Yeah.
Yes.
The end. I will have to say the ending of Goodfellas. As much as I love that movie, I do feel it doesn't stick the landing the way the other
think
one.
it does. Absolutely.
What with Henry Hill getting the newspaper?
No.
He's getting the newspaper, and then there's
Henry Hill was still a drug addict at the end. He should have just been showing him as a drug addict.
But that moment of him getting in the newspaper, looking into the camera, breaking the fourth wall, smiling, and then there's that throwback to the great train robbery of the cowboy shooting the gun at the camera. Only in this case, it's Tommy emptying his pistol into the camera, and then you hear My Way. That is just that gets me the chills to see Tommy, to see Joe Pesci point the gun at the camera and just empty the barrel.
Don't you feel like they needed that stinger because they knew how flat the minute before that felt?
No.
I felt like that was a bit of trickery at the end.
I was actually surprised when I rewatched Goodfellas because I forgot about the gun shooting at the camera. I thought it was just Henry Hill getting the newspaper, then this breaks the fourth wall for a minute. So I forgot about that little post
Yeah, and again,
moment.
most people don't know that that's a callback.
Yes.
That's Scorsese's, film love and knowledge and appreciation going back to the Great Train Robbery.
Well, this is what I was saying. So that Great Train Robbery, it's a big epic film. That's the kicker is what I was trying to say. I think Goodfellas, he wanted it to feel like Casino, but he didn't have the resources, skill, time, whatever, to make it as grand and as big as he did. And so that's why I feel like Casino, again, just feels like a do-over, and a do-over for something that he didn't need to do over.
But I like Scott's question earlier that he posed at the top. If Casino had came out first, is that the movie we're all talking about? Because I still feel like Goodfellas is the better movie.
No. I think Goodfellas is the better movie, but Jacqueline, if Casino came out first, I know it's hard to erase Goodfellas from your mind and just look at Casino. Try to just imagine that Casino, that Goodfellas never happened, and it's 1990, and Casino is his first movie in theaters. Do I think that that's the movie we would be talking about here?
I think it would be The Age of Innocence.
Yes, I do. No, I don't.
Does it beat Dances with Wolves at the Oscars?
Well, if
not.
Goodfellas didn't beat Dance with Wolves, there's no way Casino is going to beat Dance with Wolves.
That's the reason why I'm saying it's like I am going back to that time, and that's what I'm trying to tell you. Those movies didn't work like that back then. They've started to work like that now. The gangster movie, like we're thinking of it, that Martin Scorsese was doing, I don't think if they were reversed, it would have changed it, because at the time, the sentiments and taste said that this type of movie wasn't it yet. And that's why he tried to elevate it, and it still didn't work.
Well, I love Dancing with Wolves. I mean, for people to say, oh my God, I can't believe Goodfellas didn't win and Dancing with Wolves won Best Picture over Goodfellas. They always put down Dancing with Wolves when they say that, when in fact, Dancing with Wolves is a beautiful, epic film. And that is why it won, because it was a sweeping, moving, epic, and
it was more like the Great Train Robbery.
Yeah, kind of was.
And that's what I'm trying to say. It's like, it's the difference between, Saving Private Ryan versus, Shakespeare in Love. And I get why people prefer the big epic.
But wait a minute, hang on. The reason that Dancing with Wolves won over Goodfellas, it's the same reason that The King's Speech won over The Social Network.
Yes.
The Social Network is a much, much better film. It is a movie that is so much more stylistic, has so much more going on. But, The King's Speech, it was a safer bet. So that's why people picked it. I think that not much had changed.
And that's also why I think Casino, as much as it is a much safer, more auteur version, when you get down to it, at that time, those people's tastes were not going that way.
And fun fact, the icing on the cake of the point that y'all were making, what did win the year Casino came out?
Wait. Braveheart. That's right.
Exactly.
Pretty big sweeping epic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, but the sweeping
and Casino
epic,
wasn't even nominated.
And Casino wasn't even nominated. And you got to look at it this way. The kind of sweeping epic they like, war movies, big romances like The English Patient or Titanic. Think about those tastes at the time.
Those tastes at the time, because if you look back to just a few years ago, a big war epic did not win Best Picture. It went to Parasite.
Exactly. So the tastes have changed. Right. And so that is the reason why I think.
And by the way, I called it right here on Rotten Tomatoes.
This is what happens when you get two Oscar experts in the room talking about Martin Scorsese. It's going to go.
It's going to go there.
Statues. And so the crazy thing about his career, when you look at it, is that the guy's won one Best Directing Oscar, and it was for The Departed, which is a movie that I find very rewatchable, but I don't put it in his top 5 best movies.
I love The Departed, but it's not nearly as good as Goodfellas.
And it's a Scorsese movie because he made it, but it's not a Scorsese movie.
I agree. It's more like Dial Back compared to Casino and to Goodfellas.
Exactly.
And to one movie we haven't really talked about much in comparing the style of Casino and Goodfellas is The Wolf of Wall Street, because it has that voiceover, that fast editing, and also that 3-hour running time.
And a much more despicable lead, which is necessary for this. I think we've got it, but I will give you, sir, Mr. Scott Mantz, the final thoughts on Mr. Martin Scorsese, because I feel like you will place him in a better thing. Because I think anyone listening to this is going to feel like a Martin Scorsese hate. I'm not. There's probably 10 films in his filmography that it would easily be something that I would go on a desert island with, including a movie like Silence and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, 2 films that we didn't even mention today that are like lesser popular versions of his filmography.
And they're not known as the classic Scorsese movies, which is why I put Hugo in there too.
Yes, exactly.
Hugo blew me away,
Hugo
and
was
only
great.
a guy with the talent and the knowledge of film history, like Martin Scorsese could
make it.
Could have made that movie. It
was that 2011?
2011, yes, it was.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
movie release dates,
That's
baby.
my man.
Yeah.
That's
So
my man.
What's your final thought to wish this man an actual happy birthday with a little bit less of my melancholy?
I would say, listen, I mean, the guy's 80 years old. I love that he is still like really busy. He's working on a film right now that I know that he wrapped with Leonardo DiCaprio that a lot of people thought might come out this year, but it's not going to happen. But I just think that the fact that he is still challenging himself at 80 years old, that he's still pushing himself, that he's still so busy, is his hand in so many things, whether it's documentaries or feature films, and it's been like that since basically the early 70s with Mean Streets. And I just think that when Martin Scorsese puts out a new film, and I feel this way about Spielberg too, when Scorsese puts out a new film, it's like getting a new Beatles album. Now, we're not getting new Beatles albums, but we are getting like a new Martin Scorsese movie. Like I love that The Fabelmans is a new Spielberg movie. He is still directing films. He is still challenging himself. When you think of Scorsese, your quick thought of Scorsese is Goodfellas, is Taxi Driver, is The Departed, is Raging Bull. Maybe not The Departed, but those three films alone, Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, and Raging Bull, three of the greatest movies ever make. And he's still making them.
Yeah. That is a great epitaph of this sort of like remembrance, even though he's still with us. But yeah, no, I think that's a good place to place him. We're going to go ahead and open up the mailbag because we're not just talking about Martin Scorsese. We have some folks that have written in. So, Brian, cue the music. Okay, this week we have Ketchup crew member Stacy Packham, and I just finished listening to your recently released podcast of the top 10 scariest movies, and I was surprised there weren't any mentions of the original Amityville Horror. Sorry, Stacy, that list was trash. I lived in a massive 3-story house built in the 1890s, and we had a few scares while living there. So the two scariest memories are the red eyes of Jody outside of the youngest daughter's bedroom, as well as the sinister voice to tell the priest, "Get out."
I remember that.
Jeez. When I first read this, I thought that happened at Stacy's house.
I'm serious.
And I was like, get out of your house.
I'm a new listener as of today's episodes. Oh, Stacy. And I really enjoyed your conversation with the co-host. Hey, Stacy, appreciate you. Glad you're a new listener. We could always use those. I'm not trashing our scariest horror movies list, but it was much more an iconic horror movies list to me than a scary horror.
Yeah, Amityville always just feels like it gets slighted a little bit from your Exorcists and your Omens and your other like classic 70s horror movies, Halloween. It feels like it's that next tier, but as far as the premise alone goes, it's as horrifying as anything.
When I saw that movie when it came out, I was terrified. And I remember watching a news report on the real story of the Lutzes, and that because it was based on a true story just made it scarier. But I don't think it's as well made as, my favorite haunted house movie of all time, my favorite scary movie of all time, a movie that I literally just watched on Halloween night and it's still scared the hell out of me, is The Shining.
There it is.
Really?
Yeah.
The Shining is my favorite
The Shining
scary
didn't
movie.
scare me the first time I watched it and hasn't scared me since.
I love that movie.
I found it funny.
It's not funny.
I found him funny.
Yeah, well, you weren't staying in room 237.
Yeah.
I got a
Stay
bath.
out. Stay
Wait,
out of
don't
room
get me wrong.
237.
I was dirtier leaving the shower.
I'm not saying it's not a scary movie. This movie was unfortunately a product of pop culture before it was something that I watched. And so all of the iconic things that were supposed to be an uncanny valley, I was like, oh, that's from The Simpsons.
Yeah.
And that happens sometimes when things...
Simpsons did it already.
Well, it wasn't that. That's just where I saw it first, obviously, because nobody was letting me watch The Shining when I was,
See, when you watch like an iconic moment reenacted for laughs, and then you go back and watch it in the way that it was originally intended,
it's just never
it's
scary.
not that. Yeah,
That's what I'm saying. So, don't get me wrong. I know The Shining is scary, but that movie in particular, I saw it the wrong way. Everything I saw in it funny.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons
I don't
why
blame you.
I think I could watch The Exorcist now, but I still am going to avoid that movie.
I stay away from it.
Yeah.
Not going to do that to myself.
Scott Scott, thank you so much for joining us. And Stacey, thank you so much for your email and for listening in. Thank you for being a Ketchup Crew member. You can be cool like Stacey. Just email us at rottentomatoesiswrong@rtисwrong@rottentomatoes.com. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you see us. But before we get out of here, Scott, sir, please let folks know where they can find you.
Well, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Movie Mantz. That's with a TZ. So, shoot me a tweet or follow me there. And I'm very active on social media, so I will engage.
Always a good like when you get one from Scott.
It is a good like. Have you got a movie recommendation for us, sir, besides Top Gun, which you have definitely been in the cheerleader section for?
I love that movie.
Yeah.
I love Top Gun. It is the best movie of the year. I think it is. Okay. But besides Top Gun, I'll go with The Fabelmans.
Okay,
Fabelmans
that's another great one.
Is one of many movies that for some reason all these great directors are going back and doing their personal films. Kenneth Branagh just won his Screenplay Academy Award
the one
for
that
Belfast.
started it was in this iteration was Alfonso.
Right, Alfonso, sure, with
Roma. That was the first one, and then they've all kind of been doing it. And not just the males. Charlotte Wells has After Sun. There's a few. But
Fabelmans is a culmination of a lot of things, because when you watch Spielberg's film and you realize his family dynamic in ways that are subtle and not very subtle have made their way into so many of his films over the years, like Close Encounters and E.T. and Poltergeist. And I just think it's a wonderful film.
Yeah, I'd say my favorite part of that is the old masters conversation he has in it. I think John Ford makes a great cameo.
Oh, boy, does he make a great cameo.
You guys got me in the theater.
All right. That is it for us today. Thank you again, Scott.
Oh, hey, speaking of the King of Comedy.
What?
My special tape's December 3rd in LA. You can get tickets at markellis.live. It's right here in Los Angeles, December 3rd. 2 shows, the new hour special.
I will actually be here.
You're going to kidnap me, aren't you?
No, but I may show up.
You should.
Because
both y'all should.
Yeah. We still have yet to see you do comedy, despite all of my efforts.
And I still
you've seen me before.
I've seen you, but the person I live with has not. And I don't think he believes me when I say that you're a comedian. He knows you're funny.
And I still say to everyone watching and listening to this podcast, Mark Ellis, I still challenge you to see a movie you have never seen before, a movie that I've recommended to you that is streaming on HBO Max, because you look so much like Richard Jordan that you need to watch Logan's Run.
Oh,
thank you very much.
All right.
Yeah, you do need to watch
Because if
Logan's
we didn't
Run.
have Star Wars in 77,
you had Logan's Run in 76.
I will do it for you.
Thank you,
For
brother.
you, I will
Thank
do it.
you, my man. Yep.
Thank you, gentlemen, for the tour of the 70s.
This
I really
was a great
appreciate
conversation.
it.
Thank you, Jacqueline and Mark.
Scorsese podcast with Logan's Run.
I mean, okay, we're going to see you next week on Rotten Tomatoes is Wrong, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank y'all for listening.